everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Bree Buonomo. Hi if you're new here, or hey if you've been here before. And today I'm going to tell you my favorite books of 2021. I waited to the very end of the year, aka trying to read as many books as I could until December 31st in order to give you the best and most accurate list that I could. And today I'm going to talk about my favorite books of the year. So overall in 2021, I read 31 books, and this is a little bit lower than I normally read, mostly because I went back to grad school and there were just huge chunks of times where I could not dedicate to reading anything other than school papers or school books. So with that in mind, I am only going to share with you my 4 favorite books of the year, and I'm not even going to put them in any particular order because there's only 4 of them. I'm just going to do it chronologically. So starting off with the books I read first that I gave 5 stars or maybe 4 stars, and then working my way down throughout the year. I recognize that 3 of these 4 books I read within the first 2 months of the year. So I don't know what that says about how my reading year went. I do think I have more disappointing books on this list than I do ones that I've enjoyed. But, you know, that happens. We live and we learn. Before I go on a tangent, let's just jump into my favorite books of 2021. Starting off with a strong finale of a book series, I have Lightbringer by Claire Legrand. This is the 3rd and final book of the Imperium trilogy, and is literally probably one of my favorite books ever. My favorite series ever. Hands down, I've loved every single book, and I am just blown away how nicely that this ending had, especially because the entire book series is told from 2 different timelines, and I think that can be really tricky, and I think Claire Legrand just has really great talent. Now, this is technically a young adult series, but I honestly feel like this reads more like an adult fantasy than some of the adult fantasy books I've read. So take that as you will. The characters are a little bit older. They're between the 18 and 22 year age range, and there are some more intimate scenes with the romance involved, and there's discussions of sex and polyamory and bisexuality, which is wonderful. But just know that if you are looking at this book because it's young adults and thinking this might be good for your 13-year-old, it might not be in some cases. And to be honest, I think the politics in this book and the world building can be a little bit complicated for younger readers. So I definitely would recommend older YA and adult readers for this series personally. So Furyborn follows 2 women, Riel and Eliana. Riel is 1,000 years in the past, and Eliana is in the present or 1,000 years in the future from Riel. And the 2 of them are potentially prophesized to be like the ruin or the savior of their world. One of them is prophesized to be the Queen of Blood, while the other one is the Queen of Light. And the first book kind of wades through why this prophecy occurred, how the 2 women are connected, and the one kind of chain of events that leads to the end of the novel and really the end of the series. And overall, it's a very interesting and compelling story that, as I mentioned, the politics and the romances and all of it was kind of done really well. There is a lot of abuse of power in this book, and I think that is the commentary, like overall, that people in higher positions, and especially when there's prophecies going on, can be taken advantage of. There is romance in the books, and like I said, there are some sex scenes, and I think that also plays into the healthy relationships and unhealthy relationships that we often see in young adult romances. This one in particular, there's definitely a lot of unhealthy romantic patterns in this, but in my opinion, it's not glamorized or romanticized. It's essentially saying that this is unhealthy because of why these people are being manipulated and being used for further power. I don't personally think there is glamorification about this, but that might be an argument. But overall, I really did like the series. It is definitely one of my favorite series, and now that it's completed, I think eventually I'm going to have to do a read through because I read them so fast as they came out that I think it would be nice to read them all together. The second book that I read in the year 2021 that became one of my favorites is Across the Green Grass Fields by Shauna McGuire. This is the 6th book in the Wayward Children series that follows children who find a door to another world, enter that door, have magical adventures, and then for some reason or another, they get kicked back into our world and have to deal with the repercussions of being back home and being uncertain if this is where they belong. This book follows a young girl named Reagan who absolutely loves horses and ponies and all things to do with that culture. She's in middle grade and is having a hard time fitting in because she really loves horses and is kind of just the quiet girl who doesn't have a lot of friends. So when a door opens and brings her to a land of all things equine, so unicorns and centaurs and satyrs, she decides to stay for quite some time and help out this world because they are in need of trying to figure out what happened to their ruler. There's a lot of dissent between all of the different tribes in this world, and Reagan is kind of the peacemaker between them and trying to figure out what's going on. So it's a very quick book, and that's probably the best recap I'm going to be able to give without too many spoilers. But I personally just really liked this book. I thought out of all of the ones she's written so far, this gave a very unique and interesting approach. I also think there's so many jokes out there about horse girls, and I feel like this was a book to like normalize that for some people too, because some people just really love horses and are all about that lifestyle, and this was a way of like making that okay, as well as putting this child into a mix of, you know, you're trying to discover yourself and you're discovering your friends and you're about to enter your teenage years where it's all about identity, and she's having a very big crisis about this. The other thing about it that I loved was that the main character is intersex, which means that she has both female and male reproductive organs, and she's also trying to figure out what that means, and because it makes her different, how that impacts her fitting in with the people that she is in our world. So going into the equine world is almost a way of being accepted as well. So ultimately, I think the story and the message was amazing. I really love Shauna McGuire's writing. I just love this series, and I really haven't found any issue with the series that, like, you know, all of them have been 4 or 5 stars for me. I've enjoyed all of them, and I think they're really easy. They always come out in January, so it's quite like a nice little gift to be able to read the next in the series right for the new year, and this is no exception. I believe a week before I post this video, the 7th book will be coming out. So if you're interested to go read them, you have 7 books that you can read at the day that I posted this video. Then in April of 2021, I finished To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini, and this is probably my favorite book of the year. I have not stopped thinking about this book at all, and I have been thinking about how cool of a movie or like a mini series it would be. I think this is one of those books that could easily be a 2-part movie, but be done successfully. Whereas, you know, other movies, you know, like Breaking Dawn or Mockingjay, they did not need to be split into 2 movies, but I can easily see this one being done in a way of 2 movies because there's a nice little breaking point about halfway through the book where I think you can leave off one movie with a lot of suspense and then pick up the second movie to conclude it. So that's just my hot take. I know I've done a video like this in the past where I talked about like 5 books that I would love to be made into some sort of adaptation, and maybe I'll have to make a part 2 of that so I can add this one to the list. But anyway, To Sleep in the Sea of Stars follows a woman named Kira who is a scientist and is tasked with going out to different planets and testing the soil and the atmosphere and everything to see if it can sustain life. They are trying to colonize other planets in order to help the human population. So her job is trying to figure out if those planets are able to be lived on. So one day she goes out to test this planet, and while she's there, she comes in contact with some alien tech, and the alien tech fuses with her. And as a result, it also sends a beacon off into the universe, and thus an entire like universal war begins with a bunch of other alien species. So there's quite a lot that happens in this book, and I can really appreciate Christopher Paolini's writing as well as the research that went into it. There's just so much depth, and it just sounds so logical. When you're reading it, I feel like I could really see this happening in like 1,000 years in the future. And it's just so fascinating to think about. These are the exact types of sci-fi books that I adore. I love thinking about the future and how like life will sustain after our Earth is no longer able to have us here. And space travel and all of that is just my favorite thing ever. Most of my favorite movies that I love to watch also have to do with space travel. Even if they're not good movies, I typically adore them. So I really just think that this series, and it will be a series, but this book was like the first one and really got me excited for what Christopher Paolini is going to do with the books in the future. I believe when I read it correctly, he's going to have a couple more books that are like set in this world, but they're not going to be like sequels. Like these are all going to be standalones, and they're going to be more in a universe type of setting rather than each kind of building upon the next. And this does conclude very nicely and has like a solid ending, or even if you didn't want to continue after reading it, you would be able to read this book and feel completely satisfied by the end. So I do think this is probably going to be my favorite book of the year, even though I said I wasn't going to label them. I am definitely going to look out for the rest of the books when he comes out with them. And last but not least, one of the only books that I read at the end of the year, and I finished it in November, that I gave 5 stars, was Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. I mentioned this book as well in my favorite audiobooks, and for the reasons that I loved the audiobooks, it's also pretty similar to why I loved the book in general. This book was so wonderful to listen to and to absorb all the stories. Neil Gaiman has an excellent voice for narration and does so in such a way that it's just like a warm cup of tea, like being so inviting and warmth, and you love to listen to him just talk to you about the Norse mythologies and the Norse stories. And it's just so simple that I loved every second of it. Now, obviously the idea of this book is literally just retelling the stories of the Norse myths for a present audience. The stories have been around for hundreds of years, so it's not like he's bringing anything new. These aren't retellings, these aren't reimaginings. It's literally just Neil Gaiman trying to share the stories of Norse mythology to the present day audience, for people who might not be familiar with them, or for people who are familiar with them. He's just sharing his account of them, and it works very well. I think this is a great starter book for people who want to give audiobooks a try. I also think this is a great starter book for people who are interested in Norse mythology, like I was. I knew the basics of Norse mythology when I read this book, but this really helped me have a bigger understanding for the core stories that make up the gods and their creations and the creation of man. Now, I did go out and buy a more thorough book of Norse mythology after reading this, so I am excited to dive a little bit more into some of the more obscure stories or particular deities. But I think if you just want to dip your toes into Norse mythology, to Neil Gaiman books, or to just mythology in general, I think this is a great place to start. And for that reason, it had to be on my list of favorite books of the year. I definitely want to read more Neil Gaiman, but having something that, is not quite his, but is his in his own way, I think that was a good place to start with his books. And there you have it. It's kind of weird that I was not able to think of 10 favorite books of the year, but that just means that these 4 books were extra special to me. They were the only ones that really stood out and things that I could still talk about months after I finished reading them. And I think that always says something when you have a book that lingers with you. So let me know down below, what were your favorite books or your favorite book of 2021? Have you read any of the books that I loved this year? And if so, what were your thoughts on them? Did you love them? Did you hate them? Or are you somewhere in the middle? Thank you all for watching, and until next time, I'll see you then. Bye.